With the release of Chapter 5 of the Sumeru Archon quest, we finally have the full story of Sumeru, and currently, it's the best in game. The region quest does a lot right off the bat. It sets up many story elements that would later pay off in the chapters. The power of Dendro, Nahida, Yelazar, the overall desperation that's felt with the quest, and the very big gap in power between the academia and the rest of Sumeru. The story is also able to better flesh out the region overall without sacrificing the pacing of the story. The story was initially set up by two chapters, with Gandharva Port Ormos, and the city as the main setting. I love the way the story sets up Yelazar as something lethal to any person who has it, and very similar to the Withering, which has a similar effect on the environment. I love that every character who was introduced in the Sumeru Archon quest had some kind of significance in the story, whether that be small and minor, or something pretty significant. I love the angle the second chapter went with, the dreams, the mystery, and the urgency of the story in the end, but the choices were a bit jank, but the ending dance of Sub-Zero's was beautiful, and felt like such a fitting end for the first arc of Sumeru, and easily one of the most memorable moments of the quest. The second arc focuses on the desert and the Doctor, the fourth harbinger in the story we meet. The story is somewhat slow in the beginning with Nahid and the Traveler, but there were still some funny moments with Paimon. The chapter climaxes with the introduction of the Doctor, the Torre. His first appearance and confrontation just oozes style and confidence compared to the previous harbingers, and the air around him just gives him a demeanor that's unrivaled. The story of the desert definitely was an improvement over a similar region in Inazuma being Watatsumi, which didn't fully explore the new region. The desert manages to both tell the story about the desert people and the academia, but also how it connects to the forest and the previous Dendro Archon. The desert people and their connection to the Dendro Archon and King Deshret the Scarlet King was really interesting to follow in the story, and seeing how different characters unfolded, like Isak and Raman, were highlights in the story. Even though they were NPCs, they still felt as interesting as the other playable characters. The Pyramid Dungeon was something else. The overall exploration and story being told throughout just exploring was something I enjoyed. It didn't feel like something you could miss, but still something that you could actively do while exploring, and not something you have to experience through dialogue. The final chapter was amazing. Seeing this final chapter unfold with the different characters interacting and how the overall story structure was kind of like a plan, and seeing how things affected each other like a domino effect was really interesting. Seeing characters from the first arc to the second having some kind of role in this final chapter was something I greatly enjoyed, and seeing how things were told to the player or shown, like what happened with Alhaitham and Sino, was something I didn't really expect. We even get to play as an existing character with Nilo, where we get to play her in her own segment. The final boss fight with Scaramouche is one of the best spectacle boss fights in the game, easily being on par with A and beating out the previous Harbingers, and this was such a good end of Archon Quest boss fight. I loved the overall presence of the Doctor and Scaramouche. Throughout the story, they were always an antagonistic presence, and seeing how they influenced the story was something so satisfying, and we actually get to see a lot of it unfold on screen. Seeing the Tory just weasel his way throughout the story, seeing Scaramouche become a god, seeing how his actions had some kind of knock-on effect, and the Traveler being able to speak and interact with Nahida in that one segment was so good. The journey throughout the story and experiencing the quest, and playing in many parts where I was really enjoying myself, like the dungeons in the desert, and the dungeon leading to Scaramouche, were really good, and there were many segments where you actually get to play the game and there were no long dialogue boxes. It never dragged its feet in telling its story. What I loved about the quest was you felt like an active player in the quest. You weren't just observing what's happening in the story, where in many Archon quests, you're just there. You're just watching what's going on and what's happening, and letting things unfold, and letting other people or Paimon do really the talking. But here, you felt like an active player in the quest, an active, like, piece of the puzzle that needed to be solved, and I loved every moment. There are many Archon quests in the game that often just feel like filler. There are many moments in Genshin where you just feel like an observer, but here you felt like an active piece. And that's what I really loved. And this is what a lot of quests in game kind of don't have. The player isn't really invested. Most of the time it's just filler, something forgettable. There are many moments in this game that I want to love it, but there's a certain level of hesitancy from the developers. But with this quest alone, or this chapters, it fixed it. And I'm hoping they take this level of attitude for future quest lines and really push things, because this easily made it right beside We Will Be Reunited for me as my favorite Archon quest in the game. And I'm hoping for more, because Genshin is really something else when it really